Hi, everyone. Welcome to Figuring Out Fabric, where I ask dumb questions and you get smart answers. And I'm really happy to have Meagan Longoria, who's a consultant from Denny Cherry and Associates. She works with a wide variety of tooling, so Power BI, Fabric, Azure. She helps run Workout Wednesday and has been an MVP for almost a decade now. So, welcome to the show, Meagan.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the topic for today is to talk about some of the differences between Azure or between Databricks and Microsoft Fabric. And I think this will be helpful because I think one of the things that was frustrating for me learning about Fabric is the Microsoft docs. They have a big tendency to make it sound like the way you do things with Fabric is the way everybody does it. And, medallion architecture is just a thing that everybody does. And then you start researching, you find out like, oh, Microsoft has cribbed a lot of notes from Databricks. So, do you want to talk a little bit about what Databricks is?
Yeah, sure. So Databricks was the original unified analytics platform on Azure. Um, it has both a lakehouse and a warehouse functionality. You can do notebooks in it, similar to how Application Fabrics. Um, it has some dashboarding capability, but it's not as robust as Power BI.
Right.
So you could say it is a competitor, but if you think about it, it came out first. It is considered a first party service in Azure still today, meaning your bill from Databricks goes onto your normal Azure bill. It gets support from Azure support. It just came out a little earlier than Fabric did, so it's a little more mature in some ways, and I think it maybe leans to some different audiences in other ways.
Yeah, it's always kind of funny trying to talk about Fabric and like air quotes competitors. I think they're more frenemies. Like you had at the FabCon keynote, you had I think one of the execs from Snowflake on the same stage as Satya. So there's always this kind of weirdness where they're cooperating and they're competing at the same time. But it does, I mean, Databricks is like I think the number one alternative that comes up when I see people talking about Fabric and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's definitely overlapping functionality, but there's also a bit of a difference, and I think there have been deliberate product choices made as far as features and who they wanna cater to. But you're right, it doesn't have to be a complete competitor in one or the other. In fact, I think we're seeing over the last, I don't know, 2 or 3 years maybe, more acknowledgement that companies probably have both. Or all 3 if you include Snowflake. Maybe they have a Snowflake database, but they also use Databricks and they have Fabric because they already had Power BI and they're venturing in. That's not unheard of. It's probably annoying to deal with the bills and to an overall company view of how much you spend on analytics tooling, but a lot of times it's by department or there was a very special need to do X and this tool just does it so well, or they already had Databricks, and now they're starting to adopt Fabric because they were already heavy in the Microsoft platform, but there wasn't really an equivalent until now. It's not a one or the other anymore at all, but when it comes down project to project, you're probably using at least in each step, each phase of your project, like your serving layer or your data transformation stuff, you're choosing one or the other.
Yeah, I think that makes sense because like a lot of the whole data lake ideas, you kind of have this like one lake to rule them all sort of thing, even if maybe it doesn't quite work out that way in practice, I imagine. But um yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I laugh every time IT company like Microsoft will be like, we're in 95% of Fortune 500 companies. And it's like, well, every Fortune 500 company is using like 10 competing tools. So I like I was doing a live training for a hospital group that had bought another hospital group or whatever. And so I was training them on Power BI and the one group was using Click and the other was using Tableau. And so by the end of it, that means they're using at least all three and they were trying to learn Fabric and everything. So I think that I think that makes sense. So I think one question is like if you're on Databricks, when if at all, does it make sense to switch to Fabric?
I think that's a question a lot of people are asking, and my overall opinion is not yet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I I want I have a more nuanced answer. I work in both. I came up on the Microsoft platform. I prefer working in it just because it's kind of familiar to me. But right now, I still think Databricks is the more mature tool because it is. It's been around several years longer. Um, the place you wanna be asking questions is probably like, it's easier to get the very end of it, like, where's your report live? And have that live in Fabric, because people have been using Power BI and Databricks together for years, and if you were in Databricks and you weren't using Power BI, that would be where I would get started if I already had a big investment in Databricks. Like, if my lakehouse was already in Unity Catalog and I didn't have any problems with it, I would not put it in Fabric right now. It's just a I don't wanna call it a waste of time because there could be organizational reasons to do it, but if the functionality is meeting your needs, there's not really a compelling argument to make to say that you should go over to this less mature tool. And I'm not saying that to bag on Fabric, it's just newer, and so it's missing some things that Databricks has covered, and because they actually play so well together, um there is no need to move completely. It's like I said
Right.
earlier, you might never move everything over to Fabric unless you had some kind of executive directive. Now, later when Fabric gets more mature, I'll probably help more people move off of Databricks and into Fabric. But right now, I would say Databricks just has this more mature lakehouse. It has, I like their notebooks better. And so if you're used to it and it's functioning appropriately for what you need, don't move.
Right. There's no killer app over on the Fabric side, and I think honestly, a lot of times when I talk to people about Power BI, it would be the same thing. I don't know where the state of play is with Tableau is now that they got bought by Salesforce. I've heard like development slowed a bit. But for the longest time, like if you wanted really, really good looking visualizations, the impression I always got was like go with Tableau. And a lot of the sales pitch for Power BI was never like the top of that iceberg. It was the integrations with the Microsoft kind of Office 365 suite and everything. The fact that you could reuse the same security, you could embed in a bunch of different places. And at least of what I've seen with a lot of Fabric, there's a lot of that same story where, okay, if you're already all in on Power BI, this is in some ways an extension of Premium. Or if you're already used to Azure, you're using a lot of similar tools, but with slightly different flavors, which can get frustrating. Um, but I agree, it doesn't seem like there's any single kind of killer app, so to speak, when it comes to Fabric, other than maybe Power BI, but that's been out for a decade.
It kind of depends on how you wanna do your data engineering, data transformation.
Yeah.
If you live in notebook land, there really isn't a compelling argument, but the low code part so Databricks has what they call workflows or jobs.
Yeah.
The workflows are not as mature as pipelines, data factory in Fabric. Workflows in Databricks are newer than data factory, so some of it's just a time thing. But they have like for each loops, they can generally orchestrate things, but you're usually using them to do like a for each and call a parameterized notebook. They don't have a lot of the options that we have in Data Factory. Will they get there one day? Probably, but that's not their strong suit right now. So if I were like trying to decide between the two and I already had both at my organization, if it was going to be a lot of ELT, ETL, whatever you wanna do, transfer
Yeah.
and you wanted to orchestrate it in a low code way, um, maybe that's a compelling argument to go Fabric because the pipelines are there for it, and pipelines can call notebooks. You can call a Databricks workflow or job if you really want to from a pipeline.
Hmm.
So, it's not like you can't mix and match, just the more tools you throw in, the more complex your solution is. So if I were just trying to decide, I would probably give Fabric the points for the low code stuff.
So So I know, we were talking earlier, and you work with a bunch of different tools and all that kind of stuff. So how did you get involved with Databricks? Was it just you had customers that already were interested in Power BI, and you were trying to help them talk to the existing data, or was it more the ETL, or just you service a bunch of customers and that's what a lot of them were using?
I had a longtime customer that their they had multiple instances of the same kind of data source. So they needed to pull data from this thing and we used the API and it spit back JSON.
Yeah.
That wasn't always the same. Like, maybe we were pulling the same entity across 12 systems, but one of them, was missing this field and one of the which works fine in JSON, but when you import it back into a
Yeah.
database, you have problems. So we knew we needed a lake house, and this was pre-Fabric existing. So years and years ago at this point, like 2021, 22, somewhere in there maybe. Um, so we decided to move them to it was right after Unity Catalog came out in Databricks, maybe 2022, 23. I'm bad at timelines now.
Yeah, it's all good.
Same. Anyway, um, using Spark to parse JSON is so much easier than trying to do it in SQL in any kind of database.
Oh
Look,
god,
they
yeah.
put on an Azure SQL database. And as we needed to keep adding all these sources, it was much easier to just write Python or PySpark and land things in Unity Catalog and deal with the JSON in Spark. As it has extra functions that Spark SQL has extra functions that T-SQL doesn't have, but PySpark on its own has extra functions that could not be thought of in SQL. And so it was just a much easier way to handle that scenario. And then I had another client who had chosen a really different lakehouse platform that I'd never used and was upfront like, "I've never used this seat."
Yeah, right.
And they needed to migrate off of it. And what was funny was some other consultants had been there before me and they had already planned to do their data acquisition and transformation in Databricks. They were just landing the data in this other lakehouse tool. And so it took a few years, but they're kind of winding that other thing down because Databricks Unity Catalog basically has the better functionality there.
Yeah.
So it was more like just existing clients had a need. They were using databases before. They really needed a lake house. Well, who has a good lake house that is not horrible for learning curve? In Databricks Lakehouse, you can write SQL on it. Unity Catalog has the information schema just like a database. So the, you know, the basics of getting into Databricks, if you know databases, it's really not that bad. And that's for the most part the same any lakehouse, but Databricks being a top product, I felt pretty good that it was going to last. It was going to continue to get really good features and it has. And I do not regret the decision to move any of my clients to Databricks.
Right. Yeah.
And I say that as a Microsoft MVP who would gladly be staying in Microsoft land if I could, but I'm always, as a consultant, gonna go for what I think the best solution is at the time for my clients, so
No, I think that makes sense, and that's interesting because, like, that first customer you talk about, it's kinda like the ideal use case where you have this evolving schema, you have this API, and you have this data format, you need to just land it and then do a bunch of work later. And yeah, I mean, I used to be a DBA 6 or 7 years ago, and trying to do string manipulation, XML shredding, JSON parsing, any of that kind of stuff in T-SQL is just a nightmare. Um, and I appreciate hearing, like, some practical use cases. I think one, because data lake houses, as far as I'm aware, are pretty new. I think Databricks started talking about them like 2020 or something like that. So 5 years ago, at least when I think I looked it up. But also it's been rough. Someone who, for me, I used to be just solely Power BI. And then Microsoft was like, well, now you're a Fabric consultant, and trying to learn about this tool to solve a problem that I thought I never had. Because my customers tend to be like small, maybe medium, that kind of stuff. We're talking like tens of gigabytes. And so, as a former DBA and then Power BI consultant, to hear like my first impression was we were just throwing CSV files in a big file folder somewhere. And now I've learned about Delta Lake and all that kind of stuff. But I think a lot of people, um, with Power BI, they're used to worrying about the faucet and maybe like a little bit of the piping behind it, and now they're having to learn about like the entirety of the piping in their house and whether it's brass or bronze or lead. I think that can be a little bit disorienting for people, like whether like why you even need some of this stuff.
So this is a thing that I have not quite decided. I think it's mostly a benefit to me, but there are some times where I question that. I have always done both, as in I have always done the reporting and semantic layer stuff as well as the ETL
Right.
database stuff, data engineering now stuff. So I always controlled my database or my lakehouse and my reports and tried to do that's not quite end to end, but a larger, broader spectrum than just be I've been around since way before Power BI, but just be Power BI. And there's nothing wrong with that because you get really good when you're focused. And there are clearly more than enough jobs for people who just do Power BI. But what I always found, before that it was reporting services or a Power Pivot, 2013-ish, there would be a thing. I needed to gather data and shape it in a way to make my report successful, and I didn't wanna have to wait on someone else to do it and them not really understand, what I wanted. I could just do that. That makes you pretty employable as a consultant when you can do all of that. So it's mostly worked out for me, but that world has blown up and there are so many tools and so many different ways to do all these things that I cannot possibly learn them all. So I have to be very strategic about which things I choose. But I think if you are very into Power BI, especially the semantic model part and shaping your data and having good star schemas, you get naturally curious about what's the steps before that. And then if
Right.
you're like me and you're up in everybody's business, you wanna know what's the steps before that too. And then you just kind of learn that whole process. So, like, I'm working on a project that is we get data from a couple of files and a source Azure SQL database, and we bring it in to we land it essentially in one lake in a lake house. And then we end up with it in a warehouse, and then I build a nice semantic model and Power BI report on top of it, and I get to do all of that. So when Fabric comes along, that's great for me because that before Fabric, that was 3, 4, maybe 5 different tools depending on how you did it. And so at least they're all in one user interface. There's an argument to be made about how coherent things are in there, and I think we'll see it change over time. But I think if you are just doing the Power BI part and Fabric feels irrelevant or overwhelming, you just pick the pieces that are that are preceding this that and then you learn that part and decide if you like it or not. And then, go one step further. And if you don't care, then you don't need to know it. But I'll tell you, there's some really cool things in notebooks that I can do with a semantic model, and I wouldn't have been able to do them so quickly if I weren't already kind of involved in the data engineering side. So you're never going to learn all of Fabric. I can't even learn all of Databricks either. So you get to pick and choose, and it's okay. It's good to have a nice overview of just kind of the purpose of all the tools that exist in there in both Fabric and Databricks. But I don't other than if you're like a data architect, you kinda need to know, but if you're
Yeah.
in Power BI, it's okay. You don't have to learn it all. Just figure out how Power BI fits in. What are the pieces that directly interact with it and go from there.
Yeah, I did a blog post on like fabric guidance for small businesses because I think I agree with you. Like, the best approach if you're coming from the Power BI side is to treat it like this buffet of tools. And if you're not used to sushi, just eat the mashed potatoes and steak, and that's fine. But I do hope that we get more guidance from the community and people like us of, okay, if you are coming that way, here's the tools to focus on that are going to be the easiest to get started with or what you're most used to. I wish Gen 2 data flows were a little bit cheaper in terms of CUs. Hopefully they improve that.
Yeah.
But it is kind of like the thing that made my eyes light up when I was starting to learn Fabric is they really are trying to make it that like the maybe not a true business user, but let's say a business power user, someone who's able to like make reports with Power BI. They can do data flows, they can do visual SQL queries, and they really are trying to bring a lot more people to the table, even if sometimes it feels like the kids' table, like the poker table you get out whenever it's Thanksgiving or something like that. Um,
You know what
so
happens though?
yeah,
Those projects grow up into a giant mess because the person that made them, through no fault of their own,
sure.
had not a data engineer, did not know how to architect things, or just the product changed sometimes. I hate when I go back and look at a project I did 5 years ago and go, "What was I thinking? Oh, yeah, those 3 things did not exist back then." That's what I was thinking. We had to do things the hard way. But I think Fabric, because it is catering to that kind of power user,
Right.
it has a tendency to help you make a mess, and that's anybody can make a mess in any tool, but I think just because of that, like, because of the way it gets organized into workspaces, because there's lots of low code options, there's gonna be lots of really bad decisions in there. As a consultant, this is going to make you lots of money, and I will be
Right.
asked for this. As a person who wants good, easy, scalable solutions, um, you can't predetermine how everything's gonna work out in the end, and technology changes so fast, but it's really easy in Fabric to make a mess really quickly.
Yeah, I mean, literally, this I think past week or two, they announced that they were limiting the number of items in a workspace to 1,000, and I'm like, "Who's hitting why did they have to do that?"
You know how they did that? Because they were working in a medium to large company and then only had admin access on their one workspace, so they put everything known to man in their one workspace. It's
Yeah.
usually not a technology issue, it's like an organizational psychology type thing. It's a
Right, right. You strip your org chart kind of issue, right? Yeah. Yeah, it's but I agree because, like, I no one at Microsoft likes to admit it, but the way the Power BI was architected is to encourage shadow IT and shadow BI. The fact that Chris in accounting, she's got a credit card, she can go buy some Power BI today and start delivering value today. You got the 5 minutes to wow, and then, you get 5 months to wow, that's a mess because you can do these projects, you can have this organic growth without anyone else knowing about it. And it's great for adoption of the tool. Maybe Power BI never would have succeeded without that kind of marketing approach, but when you architect for viral growth, organic growth, shadow BI, shadow IT, then yeah, maybe as you're moving more on this data engineering side, like that's fine if that's how you're building your shed in your backyard, but that's not how we build bridges. And so I can absolutely see how over time Microsoft is going to be running into kind of these self-inflicted sort of issues. I mean,
I mean,
there
it means it's got popular, right? Like, it it grew because in the beginning it wasn't that bad, and then everybody adopted it, so it's kind of a problem for it's only a problem because people liked it and used it, so
Right.
good problem to have, but that whole the way that we have to design workspaces just encourages all of that. If
Yeah.
if you compare that to the way Databricks has workspaces, and you can build workflows and notebooks and dashboards in your workspace, but we tend not to make as many workspaces. And the workspace is a little bit separate from the Unity catalog, but they
Mhm.
help with the tables and views and all that. So I can attach that Unity catalog to 0, 1, 5 workspaces, and I can do it by database or catalog. So I could have 3 workspaces that see the same catalog. I could just have a one-to-one where this catalog and this workspace go together. And having that means I tend to make more, like, team-focused workspaces in Databricks. Like, they might slot
Gotcha.
the things, and that workspace might access lots of databases, but I might have, like, dev, um I have a group that has, like, a group of statisticians essentially that work, and they have a dev and a prod, and it's more team focused. So anything they wanna do goes in there, but they might have multiple databases. They might have, like, 1 database per project, and there's a dev database version for each of those and a prod one, but that's still only 2 workspaces. And Unity Catalog is this weird thing where you only get 1 meta store per region, kinda
Mm.
like how OneLake exists.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it just
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. So you get kind of, unless you're geographically split out, you're kind of working in one meta store, and then you just divide it up into databases and say which databases you can change where each database lives, but everything in a Unity Catalog database lives in Azure storage under the hood. So
Right.
it's in a data lake. So it's not that different, but it doesn't get nearly as crowded. Now, it's not doing quite as many things either, but even if I were doing those same activities in Fabric, I would end up with more workspaces. And I'm not here to say necessarily that that's good or bad, but for whatever reason, Databricks presents less of an organizational headache for me most of the time.
Yeah. I definitely, because I was doing that training and trying to explain security, and you have this fundamental tension with Power BI now Fabric that every workspace is both a security boundary and an content organization boundary. And I could definitely see a situation where it'd be nicer if like maybe that was different. Maybe we had tags or something else. But you really have to put in a lot more thought into what goes into a workspace than maybe you should. you know, how do we want to carve it up, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that makes sense. Um, so I guess one other general kind of thing before we kind of wrap up. So you talked about how you don't necessarily have to choose. So I know that there's I think people get mad when they call it mirroring because it's metadata mirroring, right? But do you want to talk about mirroring as well as like how easy it is to hook up Power BI to Databricks? So like when you carve it up.
Yeah. So mirroring in Fabric, when you connect to Databricks, is just the metadata. It's going to read Unity Catalog, and it just goes and queries that metadata periodically so that you can see it. When you actually run the query, the data isn't living in Fabric, it's living wherever Databricks lives. Um, so you can mirror to make it, it shows up as a mirrored database, just like if we had mirrored in, anything else, but the data isn't actually coming over in kind of a replicated fashion the way it is, right? You mirror an Azure SQL database. But that's not the only way that you can um, integrate. So
Okay.
also connect one lake to Databricks more directly. And as you said, we've always been able to connect Power BI. There's a, get data, go to Databricks, and you can decide whether you wanna do direct query or import.
Right.
That's been there forever. I think I said already, you can call a Databricks notebook or a job from a Fabric pipeline. Um, Databricks has this thing that came out earlier this year, I guess, or maybe end of last year, where they will automatically publish a semantic model, based off of the Unity catalog, and it can be worked into your workflows, so, like, stuff happens and then it publishes. I have not used it because I don't see its usefulness, because I likely have built, a bunch of measures and done a lot of really, custom things to make a good semantic model off of Databricks, so I can already refresh my semantic model. This is like if you were making changes in Unity Catalog and you wanted to get those in your semantic model, it automatically published that. I This is one of those things, and this is also where when we ask, like, Fabric to build a report for us, like, it might be a starting point, but I don't see it as useful because it is not consciously, explicitly designed.
Yeah, right.
I bring it up only to say, like, it's not a one-way thing. Fabric is not the only thing offering you all these ways to uh, integrate with Databricks. It goes the other way. Databricks is acknowledging Power BI is really popular. Here's this way that you can use Unity Catalog with Power BI, that we're helping you to do. I mean, I guess people have different opinions on the usefulness of that feature, but it's going both ways. And so it's, there's a lot of ways that you can integrate them, whether you do it early in the process with the mirroring to get that data in because you really want to do something else in Fabric first. Um, there there's just the let's put Power BI on top of Databricks. There I would just say beware of just having another place of landing your data because you could mirror. and then pull data into a lakehouse in Fabric. And I guess if some other team wants that data and you don't want them in your
Yeah.
Unity catalog, other than to periodically pull new data, that's a thing. But I think we can thoughtfully integrate it without having 3 or 4 more places where we land this data.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. So a couple questions to kind of wrap up. So what is your most favorite and least favorite Fabric feature?
Um, my most favorite is probably that you can use pipelines to refresh a semantic model and choose individual tables and partitions, and it's just in the GUI.
Okay.
Nice. Like, you
Oh,
don't
that's
write any
very
extra
nice.
code,
Yeah.
use the XMLA endpoint. It's just there, and it's super easy.
Yeah, it's really cool some of the stuff they're doing with that. And then you were talking about I think some other things, but like we had an episode with Stephanie Bruno about semantic link and semantic link labs and all that kind of stuff. So there really is just a lot of new potential that wasn't available before Fabric, which is very exciting.
I guess my least favorite feature, and it's only because it needs more attention and love, is the connection manager screen. Like, if you're administering things and how it's got, like, everybody's, because we started out with only personal connections and then they came up with a concept of shared connections.
Yeah.
And you go into a Fabric tenant, if you're the admin and you can see everything, you just, you're
I
it's made.
I did a blog post at the beginning of the year, like benchmarking loading data into one lake. And I was my biggest confusion point was, okay, I made a connection for a pipeline or for a data flow. Where's that connection being stored? At what level? Like, is it in the tenant? Is it associated with me? Is it in the workspace? Like, I still don't 100% know. So yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, this is one of those things where when you design for departmental BI, you're kind of causing a mess later because almost every time we make a connection in Fabric, it tries to use our personal credentials. It's not that you can't change it, but the deep
Right, right, right.
my
Yeah.
user. And if you're a consultant, you know never to build things or at least to have a separate user that can take over things in Fabric. Because just like a data set has an owner, a semantic model has an owner, a lakehouse has an owner, a warehouse has an owner. So when I leave that organization and my user gets turned off, my
Right.
lakehouse can stop working. So same thing in pipelines, we have to be really careful not to use our personal user. If it were your personal project, you wouldn't care. But when you need this to run every day reliably, right, you don't want it to be tied to a single user. So when you open up that connections page, you're like, oh, it's all these things for all these individuals
Yeah.
that should have been a service principal or should have been some kind of shared connection, but maybe that was built before the implementation of shared connections. It's a lot, and it makes for a good project to go clean some of that up, but, that page needs a lot of love. It could be so useful. I'm glad that they at least started putting it there, but it there are so many things that could be done with it that just aren't there yet, so
Yeah.
that's why it's my least favorite, but it's also a really promising one as soon as it.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that where it's just like it just needs some more love. So no, that makes sense. Um, so last question is there's way too many social media networks. Where can people find you? Is there anything you want to promote? Anything like that?
You can find me on Blue Sky. I am M. Marie, and what have I done lately? I'm in the process of moving my blog to a new host, but my blog is datasavvy.me. And I just finished tech editing a book written by Ben Weissman and Nicola
Oh,
Ibbett.
nice.
Is Fundamentals of Fabric. Wow, I need more coffee today.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
it is in the process. It's supposed to come out in July, and it was
Okay, because I know it kept getting delayed because Fabric kept changing.
writing and tech editing books these days is an adventure because the tech is constantly changing underneath you.
Yeah.
Not sure if I will ever write a book again because of that, because by the time you finish it all, it'll be out of date. But I think they were pretty smart. There is some code in there and some stuff in there, but they tried to keep it high level for those people that just need to understand what all is even in Fabric.
Yeah.
So again, I'm not an author. I just tech edited, but I had a lot of fun with that. So
Cool.
that out.
we'll put it in the show notes for sure. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Megan. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.